Nature of Society, Part 1, Session 3. Last week we discussed at length how the man-made world is created by and large by man's work on land, and the type of world created is dependent on the conditions at the point of interaction between these two elements. Regardless of how sophisticated the economic system process appear to be, it is all about man's work on land and the conditions at the point of interaction. We were asked to have a look at this, and specifically to have a look at a few questions. What are the conditions at the point of interaction between man's work on land? What are the conditions that militate against their coming together? What are the conditions that would encourage their coming together? This session, we will look at how a society is formed. By examining this, we may gain some insight into how the problems and the challenges facing society were formed and what solutions may be possible as far as socio-economic issues are concerned. We begin by imagining that a group of seafarers would have come from the first world and landed on any one of the chain of islands in the Caribbean, or on any landmass for that matter. The sea travelers would have arrived at the island and would have occupied those areas that would be best for growing food, accessing fresh water, and for any other activities they were engaged in. This level of production of this initial group of travelers arriving and setting up on the island could be illustrated by the following diagram. This diagram illustrates the production profile of the first 10 arrivals on the island. These persons would have occupied the best lands, and each person would more or less have the same production levels. With the arrival of a second group of persons, and with all the best lands occupied, the second group would occupy the next best lands, and their production profiles would reflect this fact, in that this group's production levels would be less than the first group's. This is depicted in the diagram in the next slide. A third group will then follow, and their production profile will again be less than the first two groups. More groups will arrive, and their production profiles will reduce until the point is reached where there is no production possible on the remaining lands, and these persons will only have recourse to find employment on those areas and lands where production is possible. They will seek employment ideally with those persons who arrived earlier and occupied the best lands. They will certainly be employed, and the production profiles on these better lands will now rise exponentially, as follows in the next slide. The employed persons will certainly cause the production profiles to almost double, as two persons working together on fertile lands will double production. Will the employed person be remunerated in line with this doubling of production? This is not likely to be the case, as he will only be paid slightly better than what he can get by working those lands that are the least productive. In other words, he will only be given the incentive that is slightly better than what he would get if he works the least productive land available. In the meantime, the first arrival's income would have doubled. The occupier of the better lands can go one the better by becoming landlords and removing themselves from the production process and renting out the lands to entrepreneurs who will now produce on these lands. They in turn will employ those persons seeking employment. The situation will arrive where certain landlords will not rent out the lands, but hold them out of production, awaiting the right price to rent or to sell through speculation. When enough of these landlord types exist, this will have a significant impact on employment levels as well as on wages, driving up unemployment and driving down wages. We can now begin to appreciate how the socio-economic problems and challenges that we observe were formed. With the rise of unemployment and with the lowering of wages, these two have a significant effect on the quality on life that significant numbers in the society experience. I pause now and will continue after a short break thereafter to hear from Henry George, a 19th century social scientist, and his description of how a community is formed. This excerpt is entitled How a Society Creates Its Rent. And then here I reintroduce my latest publication, Sustainable World, and it's a book about what we are discussing in these lectures, chock full of information, and it's about in the modern day context. So the book is available at Amazon, at the link there, but you can just punch in Sustainable World, Nigel Gittins, and it will come up. It's a very good read, and I'm sure that you will enjoy it. Here's a description by Henry George, his 19th century social and economic philosopher. It is entitled, How a Society Creates Its Rent. Here, let us imagine in an unbounded savanna, stretching off in unbroken sameness of grass and flower, tree and rill, till the traveler tires of monotony. Along comes the wagon of the first immigrant. Where to settle he cannot tell. Every acre seems as good as every other acre. As to wood, as to water, as to fertility, as to situation, there is absolutely no choice, and he is perplexed by the embarrassment of riches. Tired out with the search for one place that is better than another, he stops somewhere, anywhere, and starts to make himself a home. The soil is virgin and rich. Game is abundant. The streams flash with the finest trout. Nature is at her very best. He has what, were he in a populous district, would make him rich. But he is poor. To say nothing of the mental craving which would lead him to welcome the sorriest stranger, he labors under all the material disadvantages of solitude. He can get no temporary assistance for any work that requires a greater union of strength than that afforded by his own family, or by such help as he can permanently keep. Though he has cattle, he cannot often have fresh meat, for to get a beefsteak he must kill a bullock. He must be his own blacksmith, wagon maker, carpenter, and cobbler. In short, a jack of all trades and a master of none. He cannot have his children schooled, for to do so he must himself pay and maintain a teacher. Such things as he cannot produce himself, he must buy in quantities and keep on hand, or else go without, for he cannot be constantly leaving his work and making a long journey to the verge of civilization. And when forced to do so, the getting of a vial of medicine or the replacement of a broken auger may cost him the labor of himself and the horses for days. Soon there comes another immigrant, although every quarter section of the boundless plain is as good as every other quarter section. He is not beset by any embarrassment as to where to settle. Though the land is the same, there is one place, and that is where there is already a settler, and he may have a neighbor. He settles by the side of the first comer, whose condition is at once greatly improved, and to whom many things are now possible that was before impossible. For the two men may help each other to do things that one man could ever do. Another immigrant comes and guided by the same attraction, settles where there are already two. Another and another, until around our first comer there are a score of neighbors. labor has now an effectiveness which, in the solitary state, it could not approach. If heavy work is to be done, the settlers have a log rolling, and together accomplish in a day what singly would require years. When one kills a bullock, the other takes part in it, returning when they kill, and thus have fresh meat all the time. Together they have a schoolmaster, and the children of each are taught for a fractional part of what similar teaching would have cost the first settler. It becomes a comparatively easy matter to send to the nearest town, for someone is always going, but there is less need for such journeys. A blacksmith and a wheelwright soon set up shops, and other settlers can have his tools repaired for a small part of the labor that they formerly cost him. A store is open, and he can get what he wants as he wants it. A post office, soon added, gives him regular communication with the rest of the world. Then comes a cobbler, a carpenter, a harness maker, a doctor, and a little church soon arises. Satisfaction soon becomes possible, that in the solitary state were impossible. There are gratifications for the social and intellectual nature, for that part of man that rises above the animal. The power of sympathy, the sense of companionship, the emulation of comparison and contrast open a wider and fuller and more varied life. In rejoicing, there are others to rejoice. In sorrow, the mourners do not mourn alone. There are husky bees and apple pavings and quilting parties. Though the ballroom be unplastered and the orchestra but a fiddle, the notes of the musician are yet in the strain, and Cupid danced with the dancers. At the wedding, there are others to admire and enjoy. In the house of death, there are watchers. By the open grave stands human sympathy to sustain the mourners. Occasionally comes a struggling lecture to open up glimpses of the world of science, of literature, or of art. At election times come stump speakers, and the citizen rises to a sense of dignity and power. As the cause of empires is tried before him in the struggle of John Doe and Richard Poe for his support and the roll. And by comes the circus, talked of months before, and the opening to children whose horizon has been the prairie, all the realms of imagination, princes and princesses of fairy tale, mad-clad crusaders, turbaned Moors, Cinderella's fairy coach, and the giants of nursery lore, lions such as crouched before Daniel, or encircling Roman amphitheater toward the saints of God, ostriches who recall the sandy deserts, camels such as stood around when the wicked brethren raised Joseph from the well and sold him into bondage, elephants such as crossed the Alps with Hannibal or felt the sword of Maccabees, and glorious music that thrills and builds in the chambers of the mind, as rose the sunny dome of Kublai Khan. Go toward the settler now and say to him, you have so many fruit trees which you planted, so much fencing, such a well, a barn, a house. In short, you have by your labor added so much value to this farm. Your land itself is not so quite good. You have been cropping it, and by it will need manure. I will give you the full value of all your improvements if you will give it to me and go again with your family beyond the verge of settlements. He would laugh at you. His land yields no more wheat or potatoes than before, but it yields far more of all the necessaries and comforts of life. His labor upon it will bring no heavier crops but it will bring far more of all the other things for which men work. The presence of other settlers, the increase of population, has added to the productiveness of these things. We will have a look at the conclusion of this anecdote next week. Next week, we will continue to look at how a society is formed, specifically, and what happens when all the lands become enclosed. Before we end, I would like to let you attendees know that Unsustainable Development is an educational offering devoted to the dissemination of its course to all of mankind and to those who have the English language as their official language in the first instance, and to all eventually all over the world. To make this possible, and because we do not charge a fee for this dissemination, we rely wholeheartedly on monetary donations to meet the cost of achieving these goals. If you have found these sessions useful thus far and would like others to have access to them, we would gratefully accept your donations should you be inclined to offer them. You can send donations to our PayPal account at the email address notebroker2001@yahoo.com. Thank you for your kind gesture. As indicated before, you can communicate with us by going to our Facebook page, Unsustainable Development, or our website, unsustainabledevelopment.com, or our YouTube channel, Balancing the Economy. We will respond to all your comments and questions. You can also be subscribed to our YouTube channel. Press the alert button to get notices that our latest session has been posted.